We went back to learning Sichos. And we're going through the Chumash. That's what we're doing. We're going through from the beginning of the Chumash. I started maybe 10 years ago. Pashat Lech Lecha. We're learning the Rebbe Sichos in the narrative. We're learning the stories. We're not learning the halachas. We're learning the stories of the Chumash. And the story we're currently learning, I want to call it the first day. The day that the Jewish people arrived at Har Sinai. The first day, Rosh, Chodesh, Sivan. And this is our third class and our second Sicha. Okay? We already had two classes where we discussed the Jewish people's arrival at Har Sinai. And the last Sicha that we learned was fascinating, I think. In that Sicha, the Rebbe discussed Ish echad belev echad rather than belev echad ish echad. Why do we say first ish echad as one person and second belev echad as one heart? And the Rebbe's answer in short is, first we were a people and then we got a Torah. Ish echad, we were one people, belev echad, in one heart and receiving the Torah. That's in short what the Rebbe told us in the previous Sicha. Now, we're moving on to the new Sicha. I actually copied these last week, and as fate would have it, we didn't get to it, so we're doing it today. We're starting today this new Sicha. I hope to finish it today also. The subject matter is as follows. The Jewish people are traveling. And they're traveling very fast. And remember, they're cumbersome. The Jewish people are not 12 chevre. They're a few million strong. There's 600,000 men from the age of 20 to 60. And then there are many children. There are many senior citizens. And there's an equal number of women. And then there is also an Eid of Rav, a whole multitude of people who joined along because they thought it was a good thing to join. So you're talking about several million people traveling through the desert in mass, in one large group of people, and they would rest and they'd set up camp. They'd put up tents. Everybody had to have space. They would set up camp. Later on, they would determine that the Shvatim would be situated separately. Reuven, Shimon, and Gad in the south, and Yehuda, Yisachar, and Zvulun in the east, and Dan, Naphtali, and Asher in the north, and whatever it is, Gad, Asher, and somebody else. I've got them all mixed up. But they had a whole arrangement of how they would sit. Yeah. And the camps of the Jewish people, all told, was 144 square kilometers. That's how I understand it. I consider a mil a kilometer. There were 12 mil, 12 times 12 is 144 square kilometers, which is a considerable area, but it's not a million miles. That's what the camp was basically a square. The problem is they keep moving. They keep moving. In the last 5 weeks, they've moved a half a dozen times. And every time they move, one takes down their tents, packs up all their belongings, prepares all of their livestock, and then they march. They come to a new location, they settle, they build a whole camp, they put up their tents, they pitch their livestock to some kind of a post. I don't know what it was. They stay for a couple of days and then they start it all over again. And they're moving very, very rapidly, moving very fast.
Living out of suitcases?
I don't think so, no. They put up their tents. I mean, I don't know what kind of furniture they had, but every place that they came to, they settled. Now, in the course of 40 years, they would travel 42 times. But you must understand that probably half of those 42 journeys were in the first and the last year of that 40 years. For 19 of those years, they sat in one spot in a place called Chodesh. So the 42 journeys, which take place over 40 years, are not on average one a year. In the middle years, they traveled very infrequently, but in the beginning of the journey, and the end of the journey, they traveled a lot. And as we discussed in the previous Sicha, and in this Sicha it's going to become explicitly clear, each journey, each chanoya, each masa, is a physical trip. They physically packed up everything they had, they put everything together, they bundled it up, however they traveled, with donkeys or with wagons or with a combination, and they moved to the next place, they unloaded, they set everything up, they made it all beautiful. Sometimes they stayed a day. Sometimes they stayed 2 days. And each place that they came to had a permanence. There's a halach in Hilchos Shabbos, which the Gemara brings, that according to most opinions, a desert, a midbar, is considered a Makom Ptur. A desert belongs to no one. A public domain belongs to everyone. A desert belongs to no one. A Makom Ptur is not considered a property. It's not a reshus. When the Jewish people traveled through the desert, because the Shechina traveled with them, because the Beis Hamikdash traveled with them, wherever they came to, became not a desert, it became a public domain, it became a Reshus HaRabim, and it became a question of traveling on Shabbos. And the way it's explained is that every trip had a permanence. They came to a place, they unpacked everything, they set everything the way it's supposed to be, and then the next day God said move, they moved again. And Chassidus adds, from the Baal Shem Tov, and then after the Baal Shem Tov, and so on, that every physical journey is a spiritual journey. Every time they moved physically, they were being told to move spiritually. They moved 42 times because there's 42 steps in a person's spiritual growth. That's what the Baal Shem Tov says. So every time they're moving, they're not just physically packing up all their belongings and moving to a new place and unpacking all their belongings and reestablishing themselves in that new place. They were spiritually changing from one form of avodah to another form of avodah. And the most important challenge that exists in this process is speed. Rapidity. They're moving very fast, very fast, very fast, very fast, very fast, very fast. Now, why are they moving this fast? Because God is moving them that fast. Why is God moving them that fast? Because God thinks they can. He's a pretty smart guy, God. You know, he's a pretty smart guy, right? He made the program which runs our supercomputer, so he pretty much understands how we operate. And in the midbar, he said, I'm going to get these people to meet the potential that they have as pretty close to perfectly as possible. And this is the rapid movement. The rapid movement is a symptom of Hashem believing that we're ready to move. But here was the problem. He thought we were ready to move. We didn't think so. For every journey that he gave us a week, we thought we needed a year. For every journey that he gave us a year, we thought we needed a decade. For every journey that he gave us a decade, we thought we needed a century. We were moving much slower than him, because we were stuck in our Yetzer Hara, and Hashem was not playing along. Hashem wasn't being a nice guy. Hashem was expecting us to follow his lead and go out into the desert and move at this incredibly rapid pace to get to the promised land, to get to Eretz Neshama, to come into Eretz Yisrael. I heard, and you know what I heard means? I don't know, but I heard this as a bocher. I've never seen the letter, but there's a rumor. And you know, Mr. Rumor is very hard to sue because you can't seem to find him. But I heard, as a child, I heard this 40 years ago. When I was a kid, as a teenager, I heard. When the Rebbe first became a Rebbe, he wrote a letter to Anash in Eretz Yisrael, to the Chassidim in Eretz Yisrael, and he said to them the following. He says, we can approach this in two ways. Number one, we can work very, very, very fast and very, very hard and bring Mashiach very, very quickly. Or we can take our time, and it'll take forever to Mashiach to come. And I propose that we should work fast and bring Mashiach fast. That's what I heard. I heard this as a child, as a teenager. And if you've ever seen the Rebbe's correspondence, in the first few years after he became a Rebbe, you can feel that urgency. Do it now, don't wait till tomorrow. And then at some point the Rebbe actually, if you're allowed to say this, sort of slows down, but you could see in the letters in the beginning, an incredible urgency. Hashem is moving the Yidden incredibly quickly. And they never feel ready, physically, and more importantly, they never feel ready spiritually. Now, let's say something nice about the Jews. Let's say, even though we're Jewish, let's say something nice about the Jewish people. Our partnership in this undertaking, in this endeavor, was our emunah. We were slaves for 116 years. We were slaves for 86 years, whatever number it was. And we were broken. We were broken. We were so broken, we didn't have any ego. We had no will. We had no self-identity. And the Eibishter made us into a nation, and he gave us an ego, and he gave us a will, and he gave us free will very rapidly, very, very fast. And he did everything. He made one miracle, and a second miracle, and a third miracle, and a fourth miracle, and a fifth miracle, and a sixth miracle, and a seventh miracle, and an eighth miracle, and a ninth miracle, and a 10th miracle, and 11th miracle, and 12th. What was our role? To trust him. That's it. Like it says in the Siddur, which is based on the pasuk that we say in Rosh Hashanah, Zacharti lo chesed neurayach. I remember the love of your youth, avas kol yisayach, the affections of our betrothal. Lechtei chacharei b'midbar, when you followed me into the desert, be'eretz leizerua, to a land which is infertile. In other words, Aboisai Yidden went out into the midbar. Hashem did everything. He gave them manna min hashamayim. He gave them water from a rock. He gave them anani yakovet, clouds of glory that protected them. What was their role? Trust him. Trust him. And the Eibishter challenged us so much that we found ourselves having a hard time trusting him 10 times, like it says in Chumash. Hashem really pushed us to the edge. Hashem wanted us to trust Him so much that Yidden who were seeing witnesses, miracles, midei yoyim b'yoyim, Yidden who saw miracles day after day after day, had a hard time adapting to the divine expectation because it was happening so fast. That's the story. It explains a lot of things. It explains all the complaining. It even in some level explains the egel. Hashem is pushing them. And He's pushing them on a faith level. He's not pushing them to pick up another rock. He's pushing them to trust Him and to believe in Him in a very, very extreme way. And the Yidden have a hard time with it. So Rashi articulates it. Rashi describes the difficulty that the Jewish people had in moving at the speed of God. That's basically what it is. To move as fast as Hashem wanted for them to move. And He uses two words. Tarumas and machlekes. Tarumas means complaining, and machlekes means arguing. And I explained it to you. Who were they complaining to? They were complaining to Moshe Rabbeinu. Why are we moving so fast? They were complaining to God. Machlekes, they were arguing. Who are they arguing with? With the person in the next tent. Their contemporaries, their friends. They complained to Moshe that Hashem is moving them too fast, and they argued with their friends of what is the meaning of this move. What does it mean they're moving now? What does it mean? Spiritually, what is the meaning of this move? So, Kol Shara Chaniyas with Tarumas and Machlekes, every time they traveled and rested, to the Eibush they said, excuse me, I need another week, and to one another they argued what it means. With one exception. The one exception is, when the Jewish people left this wonderful place called Refidim, and they traveled 1 kilometer, according to some opinions, 2,000 amas, to Har Sinai. Nobody complained and nobody argued. Beli Tarumas, they didn't complain to the Eibishter. Beli Machlekes, they didn't argue with one another. They sort of understood and they appreciated why they need to do it. And they also agreed as to what they were trying to accomplish. There was no Machlekes. This is the story of what we're going to call Monday, the first day in the month of Sivan. We're going to follow the Shita of the Rabbana, not Rabbi Yossi. Monday, the first day of Sivan, the Jewish people moved from a place called Refidim, a place called Sinai, and everyone was thrilled to move. K'ish echad, one person, they had social unity. B'leiv echad, with one heart, they had religious unity. Torah mitzvahs unity. No tarumas, they didn't complain to Moshe why they're moving again so quickly. And no machlekes, didn't argue with one another what the meaning of the move was. All the people came to an emek hashava, they came to a depth where they all agreed. Questions or comments? Questions or comments? Now, we're about to embark on a Sicha, which you have in front of you. And as you all know, you want to follow the classes that I give, just look at the underlined, okay? If you have the copy, look at the underlined. If you follow the underlined, you'll be fine. If you wander away, you'll be wandered. You'll be lost, okay? You'll be wondering. Follow the underlined. This is a Sicha where the Rebbe is going to further explore the significance of the fact when they came from Refidim to Har Sinai, they were Ish Echad B'Leiv Echad, this one man with one heart, and the Rebbe is going to study what and why. But he's going to add a kvetch. There's a kvetch. The Sicha has a kvetch, has a nuance, has a tweak. The kvetch, the nuance of this Sicha is, Rabbi Yisai, the kvetch and the nuance of the Sicha is that what unified the Jewish people, that they neither complain nor argue, was Torah. The power for this unusual event of unity, where they didn't complain to Moshe that they're moving too fast, and they didn't argue with one another about the meaning of the move, but they sort of all appreciated, this is the right thing to do, and this is how it has to be done, this is what needs to be done, and so on and so forth, is connected to Torah. Torah created peace. The Pasuk says, Torah is called Oiz, and Torah is called Shalom, peace. And at Har Sinai, when the Jewish people traveled the short distance from Refidim to Sinai, they encountered this inner peace, this inner Shalom, and that was in other words, the peace of Torah. It was the basis for why they all understood that they need to move, and they all agreed about the meaning to the move. There was no tarumas, no machlekes. They weren't complaining to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they were not arguing with one another. Questions or comments? So let's repeat this one more time. We're learning the second Sicha on the same exact idea, right? Vayichan Sham Yisrael neged Har. The Jewish people rested adjacent to the mountains. Ki'ish echad b'leiv echad, as one person with one heart. And Rashi says, Kol sha'ar hachaniyos, whenever the Jewish people move and rest, they complain and argue. And we're going to be nice, and we're going to say they're complaining to Hashem that their avodah is happening too fast. They're arguing with one another about the meaning of the avodah. But on this occasion, they all agreed. And again, what's unique about this Sicha is that the Rebbe blames it on Torah. Or, to contrast it to the previous Sicha, right? The whole point of the last Sicha was that it was Ki'ish Echad, the unity was a familial unity, a Neshama oneness, not a Torah oneness. This Sicha is going to argue that the source of their unity was Torah. You could almost say that the last Sicha and this Sicha is like a hand and a glove. In the previous Sicha, the Rebbe says they hadn't received the Torah yet. So the unity came from their familial, from the fact that they were one family. This Sicha is going to blame the unity on the Torah. So let us proceed. Okay, now you know how it works. Just follow the underline and you'll be good. Israel rested there adjacent to the mountains. Says Rashi, is a mechilta. This is a mechilta. Kol makem huemer, wherever, all other places it's written. Vayisu vayachanu, they traveled and they rested in plural. They in Lashon Rabim traveled. They in Lashon Rabim rested, which the mechilta interprets. Nesim b'machlekes, they traveled with divisions. V'chaynim b'machlekes, they rested with divisions. In other words, they had disagreements about why they're traveling and where they're traveling to. Aval kan hush v'leiv echad, here they all had one heart. This wasn't the mechilta. Now Rashi says, and I didn't underline Rashi, it's the next paragraph, Kish echad b'leiv echad, like one man with one heart. Shar kol hachanuyos, every other time they traveled was patrumas, they complained, the machlekes, they argued. Now girls, I want you to understand something. I'm teaching you Sichas, yeah? I'm manipulating the Sichas. In other words, I'm not teaching you the Sicha necessarily the Poshet, the way the Sicha was designed. I'm teaching you the Sicha in concert with our vision, that we're trying to study the narrative, the story of the Chumash through the prism of the Rebbe's learning, the Rebbe's thinking. So this Sicha technically is an analysis of the difference between two interpretations of these words, the Mechilta and Rashi. We're not going to notice that. We're going to sort of skim over it. We're simply going to explain, like I said to you earlier, how the Jewish people achieved the unity, how they usually argued and usually complained. Here they achieved the unity, and the big idea of the Sicha is that the unity has to do with Torah. So let's go. Page 109, second column. Leide Mechilta, according to the Mechilta, which is a Medrash, is the Pirush von Machlekes, that when it says that they argued, not in dem Sinn von Kriegen sich, they were, no, wait, I skipped. Go back, 109 first column, 109 first column. When Rashi sagt, when Rashi says, Kol hachanuyos v'trum machlekes, every time they traveled, they complained and argued, meint dem inyan von tarumes und machlekes in poshet and zin. He means they were complaining and they argued, and very basically, krigerei, they were unsettled. They were not getting along. Yeah, you ever watched a film of walruses on a beach? You know what I'm talking about? You may have not watched a film of walruses on a beach. It's not that important. But walruses live in the Arctic. It's very cold, and they're very well protected by their blubber, right? But they haul out on the ice or on land to really warm up. And they also haul up on the ice to molt, to lose their old skin and to get a new skin. And when they're molting, they're very itchy. They're always scratching against the rock because they're losing one layer of skin to get a new layer of skin. So the beaches are very crowded, and they're constantly jostling. You know, they're big, massive 2-ton creatures or 1-ton creatures with tusks that are almost the biggest size of tusks of elephants. And they're pushing and they're jostling, you know, so you finally get comfortable. 2 minutes later, another guy's got an itch, and the whole colony's fighting again, and then they wrestle down, and that's how it goes, yeah. That's if you want to understand, a bunch of people, if everybody in his own place is good, but anything changes, everybody is out of sorts.
Tishrei 770. Like
Tishrei 770. And this is what's happening with the Jewish people. Every time they moved, there was this, there was an order. Everybody found their place. You know, I'm laying on the rocks in this position. I'm laying on my left side. I got my flipper here, my tusks facing in this direction. One guy moves, and the whole situation becomes a domino effect. When you stay in one place, it's good. You start to move, everything goes nuts. So Rashi says that's what happened. Every time they travel, they complain and argue. Why? Because they're not comfortable in the transition. They're not comfortable in the change. So they're literally fighting with each other. Those walruses, they hit each other with their tusks. You know, it's a nest, they have skin this thick, otherwise they kill each other. Okay? So you're not complaining and arguing not in some esoteric and mystical and lofty way. They're complaining and they're arguing because they're pashut, irritated, they're out of sorts. That's Rashi's position. Second column, 109. Like the Mechilta, as opposed to the Medrash, is the Pirush from Achlaikis. When it says here they were divided, nit in dem Sinn von kriegen sich, Hepech HaShalom. It doesn't mean in the literal sense, as Rashi holds, that they couldn't get along, they were arguing, they were fighting, they were washing machining. Nor Hepech von Leivecha, they were lacking one heart. In other words, Chilukei Deis. The argument, according to Mechilta, was much finer. They were disagreeing about philosophy. Whereas, since the fact is that no two people have the same mind, and certainly no two Jews have the same mind, is if many people do something the same, muzin, it needs to be, al piteva, naturally, oifkumen, to emerge, to arise, to surface, fashidin ideas, various approaches, vidas zu ton, how this should be done. So Rashi holds they were fighting with one another. The Mechilta holds they were disagreeing with one another. Fighting means they couldn't tolerate each other. They were like disturbed by one another. Disagreeing means they respected each other, but they had different approaches. Now bracket. Now girls, this bracket is the source of this idea that I've been teaching forever. That the things they were complaining about and that the things they were arguing about were spiritual. Look inside, please, right here. Bepnimius ha'inyan. According to Hasidus, and in footnote 12, there's a bunch of sources. In the name of the Baal Shem Tov. As the members Masoyis Bamidbar. At the 42 journeys through the desert, Zanim Merames are an illusion, they're a hint. Of Mem, Beis, Madreges, Valiyas, 42 steps and 42 ascents in Avodas Hashem and one service HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now girls, in case you do not know, the Baal Shem Tov says that in the beginning of Parshas Masa, you have the 42 journeys that the Jewish people took through the desert. The Baal Shem Tov says that every single person in his entire life has 42 journeys. The Baal Shem Tov further says every human being in the course of a whole year has 42 journeys. The Baal Shem Tov further says that every single Jew, every single day, has 42 journeys. There's 42 stops that you make along your day in terms of relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the Rebbe says, so if a Jew in a lifetime and in a year and in a day has to make 42 stops, there's obviously going to be differences between each individual Jew and the community as a whole. Because by Yederin, by each individual, is the Aliyah Umasa, the ascent and journey, Loid Zain Da'agen Avodas Hashem, based on his step and his form of Avodas Hashem. Loid Zain, based on his personal Levavcha, Nafshecha, Maidach, his personal heart, his personal soul. Norda, only in this case, by Derchani, this particular journey, for Matan Torah, is given a Chodesh, something unusual occurred. The nation of Israel rested adjacent to the mountain, says Rashi, says the Mechilta Hushvu Leivachad, we suddenly had one heart. Steindik neged har, standing next to the mountain. To Kabbalah Torah, to receive the Torah from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is Hushvu Leivachad, we acquired one heart, which means we all share the interest in receiving the Torah identically. We all took the Torah, the same Torah. We all took it the same way. We all took it with the same attitude. We took it with the same spirit, so nothing to argue about. Ein und derselbe Lev. We had one single heart. When Afil nit Levav, the Rebbe said, they didn't even have a Lev with two hearts. The two bases would mean Nefesh Elokis and Nefesh Abamis. The one base means only the Neshama. The Jewish people had one heart, just their Neshama, where they were all unified in receiving the Torah. Why? Vaila, the reason is Torah, comma, was tut of dem shalom b'shleimus, turn to page 110, that affects peace wholesomely, completely, had gepoilt anachtos, created a unity, gemura, which was whole and perfect and complete, sufficient yid one to one another, biz to the extent, as is ein battle geworden zerech lukedeis, there was no differences. Normally when they traveled, they argued about the travel itself. They argued about the travel itself. Why is Hashem making us move? What is the meaning of this move? And so on. Here, they're not arguing. And the reason they're not arguing is because Hushvu Leivecha, they developed one singular heart to receiving the Torah. Because the Torah created a unity amongst them. So let's repeat, okay? I make a living in repetition. If I couldn't repeat myself, I would have run out of things to say 20 years ago. In the last Sicha, the focus was on the Ki'ish Echad. That the unity amongst Jews was not about Torah, it was about their Neshama. In this Sicha, the basis for their unity is Dafka the B'leiv Echad, the one heart, the Torah. So we learned 2 Sichas in succession, and by the way, they happen to be printed in Likutei Sichos, in the same volume 21, one after the next. The previous Sicha starts on page 100, this Sicha stays on 108, it's 2 successive Sichas, and they're giving you 2 different spins, 2 different perspectives on the basis for the unity. In the previous Sicha, the Rebbe insisted that the unity, Ki'ish Echad, had to do with their Neshama, and in this Sicha, the Rebbe is going to argue that the unity has to do with B'leiv Echad, has to do with the Torah. How do you reconcile this Sicha and this Sicha? For this you need a third Sicha, which I don't know if it exists. But this is what's going on. The Mechilta said they disagreed. Rashi says they argued. But here, both the Mechilta and Rashi agreed. They didn't disagree. They didn't argue. Everything was peaceable. Everything was good. Because they all came to a place where not only they agreed about what they need to do, they also agreed why they need to do it and what's the motivation. Where did the strength of that unity come from? The strength of unity came from the Torah itself. Questions or comments? Go ahead.
So both of them agree that the unity was from the Torah?
I can't answer that question. The wording of the Mechilta is Kan Hushfu Leiv Echad. The wording of Rashi is Ki'ish Echad Bil Leiv Echad. So the Mechilta for sure has to hold that the unity is the Torah, because the meaning of the word Leiv is desire. What was the object of the desire? The object of the desire was Torah. Rashi could be spun both ways. And in the previous Sicha, the Rebbe chose to make the issue the Ki'ish Echad. And in this Sicha, the Rebbe is aligning Rashi with the Mechilta that the issue is the Leiv Echad.
What is Mechilta?
Mechilta is one of the oldest Midrashim. But you have a Gemara, right?
Okay.
The Gemara follows the order of the Shisha Starim. Zrayim, Bayit, Nashim, Ezekim, Kachim, Taris. We have books that were written at the same time as the Gemara and the Mishnah. But they don't follow the order of the Mishnayos and the Gemara, they follow the order of the Chumash. And there are a number of Midrashim, but there's one Medrash which is called Halacha, it's a Halachic Medrash. And it's three different books, 3 different names. On Bereshis and Shmois, on Shmois it's called Mechilta. On Vayikra it's called Safra or Teiras Kayanim. And in Bamidbar and Dvarim it's called Sifri.
What about Bereshis?
So Bereshis doesn't really have Mechilta, as far as I know. These 3 Sfarim, they're called Midrashim, but they're really Halacha. And they're the same Madrege as the Gemara. But instead of following the order of the Mishnayos, Brachas, Peya, Dmai, Kelaim, Shvias, and so forth, it follows the order of the Psukim. So these 3 Midrashim, particularly the Mechilta Safra, called the Teiras Kenim, and the Sifri, are very often quoted not only as a pshat on a pasuk, but in a halacha. So it's a very important medrash, in other words, a very reliable and important medrash. It's as old as the Gemara, and it's equal to the Gemara in its value. And in many dinim, in Shulchan Aruch, are not based on the Mishnah and the Gemara, they're based on the Sifri, or the Safra, or the Mechilta. Okay?
So why isn't it so popular? Why do we hear about the Gemara and not this all the time?
Because you don't go to school often enough. Okay, now you know. So let's go. Girls, let's go. Zu verstehen klarer die Meile von Torah. So in this Sicha, that we're not accepting the version of the previous Sicha, which was strictly Rashi, that the unity had to do with their Neshama, Ki'ish Echad, but we're saying that the unity had to do with their Torah. The Torah brought them together, and the Torah created peace between them. Was dafke zi, only the Torah, tut uf, the Maila reaches the level for Hushu Leiv Echad, not Ish Echad, like the previous Sicha says. Leiv Echad, one heart. Says the Rebbe, next underline, Daf Men Frier Magdazam, you have to preface first, but the Pasuk is Madish. The Pasuk says, as Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Har, when did the Jewish people come to Har Sinai and achieve this unity? Vayisha Lachin Yachid, the Jewish people rested at the mountain, they became one. Hatzachuf Getam B'Chodesh Hashlishi happens in the 3rd month. Now we're going to break now, okay? Now, in other words, usually I break later. I'm breaking now. Because I want to divide today's class not by chronology, by minutes, but by topics. The first part of the class, we introduced the Rashi and the Mechilta, and the fact that we're saying that the unity of the Jewish people, the first day they arrived at Har Sinai, is about Torah, Lev Echad, not about their Neshamas, Ish Echad. The second class, which I'm going to be given momentarily, has to do with how the unity comes from Torah. I want you to know something. I'm asking you a question. Is the Torah a source for peace, or is Torah a source for strife? I didn't ask you a philosophical question. I asked you a personal opinion. Will the world be better off without the Torah or with the Torah? Does Torah bring people closer together, or does it make people fight and argue? So here's a Gemara for you. This is not a Mechilta, this is a Gemara. The Gemara says that the reason Har Sinai is called Sinai is because Sinai has the same shadish as the word sin'ah. Hate. Misham yard the sinah la'elam. The midbar, the Matan Torah brought hatred into the world. Now you figure this out. The whole, we say, the whole line of Torah is Shalom, and the Gemara says that the source of all politics is Har Sinai. If the Eibush had not given Torah Chas v'Shalom, you could make a case everybody would get along. Why? Because nobody would believe in anything, did nothing to argue about, nobody hunky-dory. The Torah created Sinai. The Gemara says. So I'm asking you, if the Gemara says that the meaning of the word Sinai is sin-aw, that from the giving of the Torah came hatred to the world, how come we're insisting, and there's Mishnayos like this, and there's Medrashim like this, and there's Gemaras like this, that the source of Shalom is Torah? What is the answer to that question? Go ahead.
You can't have one without the other.
Which one? Hatred without Torah or Shalom without Torah?
Both.
But the Gemara says Sinah.
What I'm trying to say is that you can't hate someone if you don't have any
relation.
Yeah.
Very interesting. So you give me a psychological explanation. It brought us close enough together that we should actually hate one another instead of care about one another. Okay, I like it also, but we're not going to accept it. We want a better tenets. Anybody else? The question is very plain. The Medrash and the Mishnah say that the Torah is source of Shalom, and the Gemara says befedish that all the hatred in the world comes from the Matan Torah. I'm going to tell you the answer. It's really common sense. In the Rebbe's language, in our Rebbe's language, and he would say it again and again and again and again, Shalom has a last name. Shalom's last name is Emes. Shalom Amiti, true peace. What is true peace? That it's not compromise. If you believe in one thing and I believe in another, and I say, okay, we're going to get along because I'm going to start believing what I believe in, and you're going to stop believing what you believe in, or I'm not really going to believe it, and you're not going to really believe it, and we're going to get along, that's not Shalom Amiti, that's Shalom. That's called Pshara. Pshara means compromise. You know what else has the same shadish as the word Pshara? Melting snow. Dilution. When you thin things out, it's called pshara. Lahafshir, to dilute, to melt, to thin out. That's not peace. That's I don't care. If I don't care and you don't care, we can get along. In other words, people can disagree. And there's two ways to solve those disagreements. A, to not care about their opinions, so they get along because they don't care. B, to get along in spite of their differences. So the Gemara says, I want you to know all the hatred in the world comes from Torah. Why? Because Torah has opinions. And the opinions of the Torah, the world disagrees with. Some people disagree with these opinions, other people disagree with other opinions. So the Torah made all kinds of trouble. Why? I'm going to use those bad words because the Torah actually means it. The Torah means what it says. There's a right way to live and a wrong way to live. It's not however you live is okay. Everybody can choose their own path. There's a right way and a wrong. It makes people angry. And if not for the Torah, Rahman al-Islam, you'd all agree because we didn't care about anything. But on the other hand, what the Torah empowers is that you're entitled to disagree, and you can be very vehement, you can be very argumentative, you can be very vociferous, you can really argue, and you can come to a place of peace. I'm not backing down from my position, you're not backing down from your position, but we still get along. So both ideas are true. Misham Yada Sinul Elam. The Torah creates in the world combativeness because Torah stands for something. And people who stand for things are going to get into differences with other people because they're not going to back away from their ideals, from their beliefs, from their principles. But at the same time, Torah teaches that one of the principles that we could have, that we could disagree, and still get along. And that's called Shalom Amiti, real peace, as opposed to bluff peace, fake peace. I visited a certain city in the northern hemisphere. I'm not going to say what country I was in. And it was many years ago. And in those days, Lubavitch is Baruch Hashem human beings, which means we don't always agree. Lubavitch, it's 28 years since Gimel Tammuz, it's 30 years since Chazai. They were doing amazing. But we don't all agree on everything. So I showed up in town and I asked a friend of mine, what's going on in this city? He says, nobody fights outwardly. We're all getting along. Inside, we all disagree. Outwardly, so he tells me in Yiddish, a false shalom is better than mechleikes. A false peace is better than a true war. False peace. I don't agree with you, but I keep my mouth shut. You keep your mouth shut, then we get along. A false shalom, a false peace is better than a true machlekes. And I agree with him. I've lived in Lubavitch my whole life. I know what machlekes looks like. I know what arguing and fighting looks like. It's bad. When a community is divided, when a family is divided, it's terrible. So if you get along because you make believe and you don't push issues, it's better than a real machlekes. But the ultimate benefit, ultimate good, is that it's not a false peace, it's a true peace, right? What's the example we have for this, Rabbi Yisai? What is the example we have for the idea of true peace? What is the example in our history we have for true peace? You know what the answer is? And it's a weird example because it's inverse, it's backwards. Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim did not get along, remember? And they died over the course of a few weeks. What's the expression in the Gemara? Leinagu kavod zeh b'zeh. They couldn't show each other kavod. They disagreed. And the Rebbe says in Likutei Sichos, what do they argue about? They argued about the teachings of their teacher Rabbi Akiva. What's the most important teaching of Rabbi Akiva above all the other teachings of Rabbi Akiva? So they argue about Avos Yisrael, and they argue about Avos Yisrael to such an extent that they couldn't respect each other, and boom. You get it? Now, here's what you got to understand. Rabbi Akiva lived after the destruction of the Second Temple. Rabbi Akiva was alive during the uprising of Bar Kochva, which was about 70 years after the Churban. Rabbi Akiva was murdered at that time. So the students of Rabbi Akiva were way after the destruction of the second Beis HaMikdash. Okay, now, who were Rabbi Akiva's teachers? Who were Rabbi Akiva's teachers? Rabbi Akiva's teachers were Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus and Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah. You couldn't find two Jews with more different backgrounds. Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah had a mother at Tzadikis. From the cradle, she raised him for Torah. Eliezer ben Hyrcanus had a father, a multi-millionaire, and from the cradle, he raised him to be a millionaire. And he ran away from home and he became a Tana. His story is written down in his own Medrash called Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, where he tells his own story. And Eliezer ben Yeshua were like a tzaddik and a Baal Tshuva. They had very different backgrounds. But they together led the Jewish people after the Churban. And Rabbi Akiva was one of their disciples. Who was the teacher of Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus, Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Who was the teacher of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? Hillel. The Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Hillel had 80 Talmidim. The greatest of his Talmidim was Rabbi Yochanan ben Azil. And the youngest, the smallest of his Talmidim was Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Imagine he had 80 students. The smallest of his students was the Rebbe of the next generation. So Rabbi Akiva's students were the students of the student of Hillel and Shammai. Now try this on for size. Listen to this. I love to say this, and I've never seen it in any sefer. I don't know why people don't bring this. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai argued a lot. They argued a lot. Right? Hillel and Shammai argued 3 times. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai argued repeatedly. And the Gemara says, why? Why did they argue so much? And the Gemara answers, because lo yishimshu kol tzarka. To paskin halachas, it's not enough to learn Torah. You have to have shimush. Shimush means you need to sit by the feet of a Rav, a Tzaddik, a Gadol B'Yisrael, paskin halachas, and watch how he applies halachas to life. There's a very big difference between a law written in a book and a law that a Rav paskins. Because in the Rav paskins, there's a third dimension. It's the person, the human being. And proper Rabbonim, what made you a good Rav was not how much Torah you knew, but how much Shimush you got. Years ago, Rabbonim would get 10 years of Shimush. They would sit by a practicing Rav for a decade before they would start to practice. But Yidden had a lot of tzaddis. It was before the Churban, before the destruction of the Second Temple, but it was the last 100 years when the Romans came into Eretz Yisrael, and it was a disaster. So people were recruited to be Rabbonim with not enough Shimush. And that's why they argued. Traditionally, when rabbis argued, they would sit down, they would talk. And almost in every case, they'd come to a consensus, to an emek hashava. The Gemara says that before Hillel and Shammai, there was one machlekes. Uno. Everything else they resolved. And the Gemara tells us what the machlekes is, was a machlekes about smicha. Hillel and Shammai, who were the last of the Zugis, argued about three things, and the Mishnah tells exactly what those three arguments were. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai have hundreds of arguments. Why? Because the more training you get, the more you learn how to listen. And the more you learn how to listen, the more you learn how to converge your thinking with your thinking of the other person. And you back away, you find a emes, an emek hashava, a true peace. So listen to this. Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim couldn't respect each other and they were killed for it, right? Their Rebbe was Rabbi Akiva. His Rebbe was Lazar ben Yeshua. His Rabbi Yechon ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yechon Zakkai was a member of the Academy of Beis Hillel. Now, listen to what the Mishnah says. In Masechta Yevamos. Some of the arguments between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai were so serious that Beis Hillel could hold that if a man marries this woman, the children are going to be Rachmana litzlan mamzerim, illegitimate. Today for children, they can't get married. And Beis Shammai will say, no problem, it's not a shayla at all, they can get married and the children will be a miyuchas, will be a kohen, will be a levi, can be a kohen gadol. Other issues was the other way around. That Beis Shammai said that if a man marries this woman, the children are going to be mamzerim, and Beis Hillel said, no big deal. And in Masechta Yevamos is a very hard Masechta, you find many cases where Beis Shammai is actually lenient and Beis Hillel is actually strict, where Beis Hillel is more afraid of mamzeris than Beis Shammai is. And they have a lot of arguments in Masechta Yevamos, a lot of arguments, and many of those arguments are such that Beis Hillel holds this marriage produces a mamzer, Beis Shammai says it produces a kohen gadol, and vice versa. And then the Mishnah says, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel made shidduchim for each other. Members of the yeshiva of Hillel would make shidduchim for the members of the yeshiva of Shammai, and members of the yeshiva of Shammai would make shidduchim for the yeshiva of Hillel. And nobody ever questioned. That means Beis Hillel knew that if someone from Beis Shammai is going to propose a girl, he's not going to choose a girl based on his opinion of whether this is a good shidduch or not. He's going to choose it based on Beis Hillel's opinion, because he knows that this person whom he's presenting the shidduch is a member of the Academy of Hillel. And if someone from the yeshiva of Beis Hillel would make a shidduch for someone from the yeshiva of Beis Shammai, they wouldn't even ask. The Chevra man from the yeshiva of Beis Shammai would know that Beis Hillel will never present to me a shidduch into the shayla, the legitimacy of the shidduch, according to his opinion. So think about this. How many generations are there between Talmidei Rabbi Akiva and Beis Hillel and Shammai? Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai also argued a lot. Hillel and Shammai only argued 3 times. The generation before Hillel and Shammai only argued once. Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai argued many times. But when those arguments became personal, there was not an argument. Beis Hillel respected Beis Shammai so much that even though Beis Hillel held that this shidduch would be mamzeris, because he knew that Beis Shammai didn't think so, he would propose the shidduch. And Beis Shammai respected Beis Hillel so much that even though Beis Shammai held that this shidduch would be a mamzer, an illegitimate, not a chasnab, because Beis Shammai knew that this particular rabbi in the yeshiva, Beis Hillel, thinks it's a kosher shidduch, they would propose it. Now this is psychological. This isn't just religious. This is called maturity. Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim couldn't respect each other because they disagreed. Just 3 generations before, they argued about a bunch of stuff, but it never became personal. That's the tight shalom amiti. True peace doesn't mean we get along. True peace means that disagreements aren't personal. I don't hate you because I disagree with you. To such an extent that what I consider a mamzer, I'll propose to you for a shidduch because I know you hold it isn't. That's greatness, Rabbi Yisai. That's greatness. And everybody talks about the Talmid Rabbi Akiva. Nobody talks about Beis Hillel Neshama. I wonder why. Comes Sfiras Omer. Just 3 generations before, the teachers of the teachers of the teacher of Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim, who died because of lack of kavod, had so much kavod. Beis Hillel Neshama. Because they didn't have that. They couldn't. Because they disagreed in Torah, they couldn't get along personally. So this is what the Gemara says. Har Sinai, the word Sinai means sin or hate. Hatred comes into the world from Har Sinai. Why? Because the Torah stands for something. Yeah, but the Rebbe says in our Sicha, it's a Mishnah, and it's a Medrash. The Kol Nesiv says, Shalom, the whole Torah is true. The answer is, yeah, of course Torah is true, but it's Shalom, it's true peace. True peace means I don't back away from me, you don't back away from you, but it's not personal, it's Torah. So when you're on a lower level, the disagreements in Torah create hate, like the Gemara says. But if you're more deeply connected to the Torah, the same Torah with its disagreement and with its principle brings out Shalom. Do you understand? Isn't that sweet? I'm going to take a break. Okay, we're going to come back in a few. And we're going to learn the second half of the Sicha, where the Rebbe is going to explain to us why Torah is the source of peace. And I'm repeating one more time that in the previous Sicha, the whole argument was Ki'ish Echad, that the unity came from their Neshamas, not from the Torah. But in this Sicha, we're saying B'leiv Echad, the unity comes from the Torah Dafke. Okay? I'll see you in a few. Chazak.